everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Eternal X Wolfpack Paranormal. I am your host, Sean Ellis, and tonight we have an amazing guest, and her name is Miss Sylvia Shults. She is an author and a paranormal investigator. She's also linked with the Heart of Illinois Center for Unexplained Phenomenons, and we're going to sit here and talk to her tonight. So let's bring on Miss Sylvia.
Hello.
How you doing tonight?
Fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm a little under the weather. I'm battling a sinus infection, so I'm kind of tongue-tied and a little debabbled here tonight. So
we'll get through this together.
We're going to have to excuse me if I get a little twisted here tonight. It's like, what the heck? But, oh well. So, Miss Sylvia, can you explain a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I have been a paranormal investigator for about 16 years now, and I have been writing books of paranormal nonfiction for about that same amount of time. It was when I was writing my first book of true ghost stories, Ghosts of the Illinois River, that I was invited to take part in a paranormal investigation, and I realized, oh my goodness, people actually go out and do this. This is wonderful. I'm in.
That's cool.
Yeah, I've always loved true ghost stories, and it never occurred to me that somebody has to go out and collect these stories. And I realized, well, it might as well be me.
True. Did you, when you were younger or growing up, did you have any strange things happen to you that led you down to this field?
No, I never experienced anything myself, but I had a father who was a huge reader and taught me to be a huge reader too. And he was also very interested in ghost stories, and he is my origin story. He's the one who got me interested in the paranormal and the weird and the strange and mysterious. I grew up in the Chicago area, so my father would tell these stories at the dinner table about Resurrection Mary and the Screaming Mummy of the Field Museum and the Ghosts of St. James the Sag and all these wonderful Chicago area ghost stories. That's what I was raised on.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever got a chance to go investigate any of the places he talked about?
Yeah. He told me a little bit about Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and I've been there a couple of times and have gotten to investigate there. And I've always loved going to the Field Museum. I've never been to the field on an investigation. And he never really told me about anything involving the Museum of Science and Industry, but that's another one of my favorite places to go. And that I have actually been investigating on the down low at the MSI, or the museum formerly known as the MSI. Apparently it's changed its name. But one of the things I wrote about in the first volume of Gone on Vacation was the U-505, the submarine there. And I remember seeing this as a kid, and I actually brought a copy of Gone on Vacation with that cover. Quick little side note. I brought that book with that cover to the museum just to show people in the gift shop and say, hey, this is a cool book that's come out and your museum is in it. And I got into conversation with a security guard who works on the U-505. And he recognized the subject of the cover immediately. So one of the cool things about the Museum of Science and Industry is that it is housed in the last remaining building of the Columbian World's Exposition in 1893, 1892, thereabouts. And there was one building left after the whole thing folded its tents and stole away into the night, and that is the building that now houses the MSI.
Oh.
So this guy who worked at the museum noticed, and the other cool thing about the Columbian Exposition is that the Ferris wheel was invented for that World's Fair.
Mhm.
So that is a picture on the cover of the very first Ferris wheel that was ever invented. And he recognized that. He's like, oh my gosh, that's Jackson Park. This is the first Ferris wheel. And that's exactly right.
Cool.
So we both got a real big kick out of that. So he told me a couple of stories about experiences he had had on the U-505. He's a big World War II buff anyway. So he's just like the perfect person to be a security guard there. He was talking about some woman came up to him and said, does the museum have holograph technology? I mean, it's a perfectly valid question. I mean, this is a science museum, obviously, you know, it's quite possible. And he's like, well, it depends. What did you see? And she said that she was looking at the submarine and she saw someone up on the top of the submarine in the conning tower. That it was a guy. He was wearing a dark uniform and he had yellow insignia on his sleeves. Mm-hmm. And the security guard thought about it for just a moment or two, and he realized that the apparition that this woman saw, because it was not a hologram, it was a full body apparition, the lucky girl, it was the apparition of Captain Dan Gallery, who was the captain responsible for the capture of the U-505. He led the task force with the USS Chatelaine that found the U-505 and depth charged her and brought her to the surface and ended up boarding her and capturing her.
Wow, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, super fun.
I've actually seen some of the holographic stuff down in Springfield when we were down in some of the museums down there.
Yeah.
It's unreal. You'd think they're right in front of you behind that glass wall or that mirror they got. And it's got like President Washington or whatever, walking behind those screens. And it looks like he's just walking through a room.
And
amazing.
It's
like unreal. And I'm like, because at first you never realized it was actually a hologram until the very end. You just thought it was glassed off stage the way it was, and the people were performing behind it, so they could have their mics and everything. Yeah. But everything just disappeared after it was all said and done.
Wow.
It was the craziest thing you ever seen, and I thought it was cool. I happened to go with my daughter on a field trip down there when I seen that, and we were like, because we were trying to debate if it was actually a real person standing there or not. And it ended up being a hologram from what they had down there in that museum. And it was pretty awesome.
That's amazing. Is that the new Lincoln Museum?
Yeah.
Cool. I've been meaning to get there, and now I have even more incentive to get there. The British are really good at holograms, too. I went to England and Scotland for 3 weeks ghost hunting a couple of years ago, and their hologram technology is just mind-blowingly cool. Hey, Christy.
Yeah. Hello, Chris Mack and Christy Rico. But yeah, I mean, they said, Walt Disney was, the inspiration behind some of those holograms was especially with the robotics that they pulled back in the days,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, holographic projection. And I've even read stories, during it might have been World War I or World War II, where the Germans were firing upon something above the sky, and they thought they were firing and wasted a lot of their ammo trying to shoot something down, and come to find out there wasn't nothing there.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow. That is cool.
About that. It was a pretty interesting story on that, too.
There was one of the museums we went to in England was the Museum of Haunted Objects in Nottingham, Robin Hood territory. And they had this museum is several floors tall, and on the second floor they had like a doll room that was made up to look like the island of the dolls down in South America. but on one wall they had 3 portraits, and it was like the Harry Potter portraits where the portraits interacted with each other. There was an old man, there was a young, beautiful young lady, there was a little girl, and the old man would come and walk behind the young lady and slip a garrote around her neck and strangle her.
Wow.
The little girl would walk over to the old man's portrait and stab him in the back. It was just the coolest thing.
Wow.
I have an odd idea of what's cool, but you know.
Everybody's got a twisted sense of humor, even I do.
We weren't allowed to film or take pictures in the museum. I was lucky enough that I had the girl at the gift shop counter. She was allowed to come with me and give me a tour of the museum, and I was allowed to record it sound wise.
Right.
And I made a Lights Out, a podcast episode of it. But yeah, we weren't allowed to film in there. I would have loved to have just stood there for 15 minutes through this entire cycle of what the portraits do and just film that so I could watch it again.
Yeah, especially some of those, well, I should say this is like when we were growing up, you'd always see these portraits on the wall of a face, the portrait itself of the face. But if you walk by, it looks like the eyes were following you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do that with kind of a different tech thing too. And that's interesting to do. I've always wanted to put one together because I can actually draw. So I'd actually wanted to draw one, make it for myself and stick it on the wall just so when people walk by, it actually looks like it's following you. There's a method to the mad for that picture, but
yeah, there is I've never really studied art, but I know there is a technique. If you paint or draw the eyes as though they're looking right at you, that from some weird optical illusion, the gaze will follow you. That's how they make it, so that the gaze follows you around the room. And
they've also got it, where if you actually make it like a triangle pyramid form, not realizing it, but the eye's still looking at you because it's still together and it's at the peak of the pyramid, and looking down. So then when you go one way, it looks like the whole eyes followed you. If you go the other way, it looks like the whole eyes followed you too. But if you go back to the front, it's still straight on.
Oh, wow.
But it's like, because the way it's made at an angle and you don't realize you drew it at that angle. So it gives it a little bit of bizarre things for it. That's definitely sure. So you're a big history buff, right?
I am. Oh, yes.
Is that what inspired you, beside your father, to write your books?
Yeah, I've always loved history. And when I started doing the paranormal investigation, I realized how important it is to know that history, because that's the reason we have the stories, is these historical events that happened. And they could be, somebody really super important like Abraham Lincoln, or they could be just some person who is living their life and their experience was perfectly valid too. Their experience ended up being a ghost story. So I've always really been fascinated by that human connection, and the human connection in history for me translated into the human connection trying to communicate with somebody on the other side of the veil. It's all just interconnected. And I think it's fascinating.
Very interesting. That's definitely interesting. Now, I know you're linked with the Heart of Illinois Center for Unexplained Phenomena, which is
yes.
David and Doc and the rest of the guys. You guys have been on the show before. So being out on an investigation and knowing some of this knowledge, of the history of this place, because I know you like to look it up. Do you think it influences your idea or your thoughts when you actually go on an investigation to locations?
I think it does, and I can absolutely appreciate the fact that some people, especially people with sensitivities to that, I appreciate the fact that some people like to go in cold and not know anything about the history or the background of a place. I personally prefer to know the history because I feel that you are better able to tailor your questions to an entity during an EVP session if you know something about their background. If you're talking to a farmer, you're not going to be talking about the science experiments they're doing. If you're talking to somebody who is really interested in classic cars, you're not going to be talking about cooking. They're
Right.
not going to be interested in answering your questions. But if you get onto a topic that you know that they were probably interested in life, you're much more apt to get a conversation going. So yes, I believe that it does influence me a little bit, but I see that as a plus, not a minus.
We have a question here from Christy. Maybe you know, I don't know anything about this. It says, did
Yes.
the government really exhume Abraham Lincoln's grave?
Yes, they did a couple of times just to make sure that he was there. Very shortly after, I think this was in, I want to say the 1870s, there was an attempt to steal Lincoln's body.
Really?
And yeah, and the thieves did an absolutely ham-handed job of it. And if there's anyone listening who has more details, just feel free to hop in the chat and correct me. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, it was like 3 or 4 guys that wanted to steal Lincoln's body and take it to the South and have the government ransom it back. Apparently, yes, he was. I'll talk about that in a second. So these guys decided to break into the tomb and steal the body, and they hired another guy to help them as a lookout. And unbeknownst to them, he actually worked for the Secret Service or something like that. He actually
Right.
worked for the government, so he completely narked them out, and
Right.
they didn't get very far at all with this body. But yeah, they did make sure that they opened the coffin, make sure he was still there. He was still very well preserved because their embalming was still kind of in its infancy during the Civil War, but the technology grew by leaps and bounds because, especially if an officer fell on the field, that they wanted to be able to bring that body back and have it buried in a family plot if they fell in battle far from home. So they really did a good job, as best they could at the time, in preserving these bodies. And this was the president of the United States, was the first president to be assassinated. So they really went all out. And also during his death tour, he lay in state in several American cities. So they really wanted him to be presentable by the end of that tour. So they really took pains to preserve him as best they could. There is one photograph that there's exactly, yeah, he looked great for a deceased man. There are several photos that purport to be Lincoln in death. Most of them are fake, but there is one that one of the honor guards, who was somebody pretty high up in the Union Army, took a picture of it, or it was a senator or something like that, took a picture, and you can tell by the people standing around him who were there at the time and by the way the body looks, that's definitely Lincoln. That is the picture of Lincoln. So yeah, when they buried him again after the theft attempt, one of the people that was invited to look at Lincoln's body in the coffin was his son Robert. So he definitely did identify this body in the casket as Lincoln. I think the government exhumed him one more time. I want to say it was in the 1920s or 30s. And just to make sure he was there. And then after they took a look at him, and he was still in pretty good shape, even by then, like 50, 60 years later. After that, they poured a concrete slab over the coffin, and he's not being moved again. He's not being messed with again. They did encase him in concrete, so he's not going anywhere. But yeah, they're.
What was the actual point of digging him up originally? The guys that was trying to do it to begin with.
Oh, they wanted to steal his body and hold it for ransom. They wanted the government to pay to get him back.
That's kind of morbid.
Very, very, but yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd want to pay to get somebody's body back, especially if it's
right. I mean, he's not using it anymore. I mean,
right. I mean, it's not like. I mean, I know he's a part of history, but okay.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's. I mean, that's about the best souvenir you can have. There was somebody dug up John Hancock and cut off his right hand so they could have the hand that signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's a heck of a souvenir.
Wow.
It's not like he was using that hand anymore, so you know.
Well, I mean, I've heard people.
Head too. The
I mean, I've heard people digging up graves to steal their jewelry and the gold caps out of their teeth. And
yeah.
I've heard that before, but to literally cut off somebody's hand just because they wrote the wow.
Yep. Truth.
That is just bizarre.
Yeah. And they had a lot of body snatching going on in the Chicago City Cemetery too. When it was still a going concern as a city cemetery, before they dug everybody up and moved them to, well, not everybody, that's why it's so haunted. There was a lucrative trade in body snatching going on right around the beginning of the Civil War and just before the Civil War. And it was Alan Pinkerton who busted that body stealing ring. So, yeah, it was frowned upon to donate your body to science, and doctors needed practice cutting up bodies and studying human anatomy. So if you don't have bodies legally to do that, you pay somebody to go and dig up a fresh corpse and practice on that. That's how you get knowledge.
I just read an article, something about this, which Christy just said that's why humans are wanting to cast iron gates around when they die. Mm-hmm. But I think those iron gates are to actually keep the energy preserved inside the cemetery, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, when we were in England, we saw quite a few graves that had kind of an iron cage over it, and we were like, "Oh God, that's kind of weird. Are they keeping a vampire in or what?" But yeah, it was partly to guard against grave robbing, and partly to guard against, partly to keep that energy in. It was a wonderful thing that we saw in Stevenage, a town called Stevenage outside London. And I'm not going to remember this fellow's name, but this guy died in the 1700s or so. And he had an absolute horror. I guess it must have been the early 1800s, because that's when the trade in body parts was really getting going. And he had an absolute horror of being dug up for parts. So he made his friends promise that they weren't going to bury him. So when he passed away, his friends were like, okay, this guy does not want to be buried, so we won't bury him. So they kept him in the rafters of a garage that was on the premises. So they put him in a lead-lined coffin, and they put the coffin in a crate, and they stuck the crate up in the rafters of this garage. And the garage is still there, and you can still see the bottom of this crate up in the rafters. And the door is kind of sagging a little bit. We couldn't get into the garage, but the door was kind of sagging, and there was a slit up at the top, a gap. And we put our cell phones in, and we were looking at everything, and I took a picture of it. But the sad thing is that during World War II, think it was World War II, there were some American soldiers that were stationed in the area, and they heard about this guy, and they went into the garage and broke into the crate and broke into the coffin and stole his bones as souvenirs. So if he had been buried properly, he
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have been messed with. Odds are he might not have been dug up for science. Instead, he was just used as souvenirs for Yankee soldiers. So in order to escape being dug up, he just fell victim to pilfering anyways.
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, there was a town close by called Knoxville, Illinois, and you can look this up.
The Knoxville Mummy!
Yep, the Knoxville Mummy. My best friends actually dated the girl.
Really?
That happened to, yeah.
That happened very, very soon before I went to college in Monmouth. That's how I heard about it. It happened just right before I got to college.
Yep. He was dating that girl, and then we found out about that. And yeah, that was pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
That was definitely pretty bizarre. So let's get into your book here. You said this one was the first book you wrote, right?
Well, that's the first in the Gone on Vacation series. The very first book I wrote was Ghosts of the Illinois River. So
Okay.
that's an old book, but Gone on Vacation is much meatier than Ghosts of the Illinois River. It's has stories from all over the world. I was talking with a friend of mine several years ago at an event up in north of Chicago. And, Christy said, I've donated my body because I was born with a disease so I could change lives and get break. Oh, good for you. That is amazing. Good on you. My father donated his body to science, but they couldn't take it because he actually died of COVID. So, yeah. So unfortunately, he couldn't go through with that. But anyway, so I was talking with a friend of mine up north of Chicago, and she used to work at Brookfield Zoo, and she was telling me how the zoo was haunted. I said, what a wonderful idea for a book. It's writing about haunted zoos. Well, maybe that won't be long enough for an entire book.
Right.
Let's go ahead and expand that a little bit. And museums, of course, museums are haunted because of all the artifacts and stuff in them. And let's... How about amusement parks too? Yeah, that'll be fun. So haunted zoos, museums, and amusement parks. And then, thank you, Christy. Appreciate that. He is deeply missed. So I was on another podcast talking with this lovely English lady, and she was telling me about a historic village in England, in the Black Country, that is haunted. Telling me those stories. I thought it was a total facepalm moment. I was like, why didn't I think of historic villages? There's Lincoln's New Salem, there's Colonial Williamsburg, there's all these places. So I decided by the end of that conversation, I knew that I had to write a second book. So Gone on Vacation, Endless Summer came out of that conversation. Yeah, there we go. So even more places that you would go on vacation and find spooky things and just find a little bit of paranormal activity with
Can you tell me a little bit about what you discovered at the Chicago Museum or the zoo, Chicago Zoo?
Sure, yeah. So we can absolutely talk about the Chicago City Cemetery. It started off in the 1830s when Chicago started growing and people started moving to Chicago and living there and dying there. So they needed some place to bury all these folks. So City Cemetery came into being. And this was really a microcosm of Chicago society. There were paupers buried there. There were people that could only afford just a wooden tombstone or a wooden marker for their graves. There were people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. There were middle-class people galore. And then there were the highest echelon. granite stones, and they had mausoleums galore. And it was really just this cross section of Chicago society. But after a while, when City Cemetery got more and more and more burials in it, the city fathers looked at it and said, it might not have been the best idea for us to put this burial ground right next to Lake Michigan, the city's water supply. Like, okay, well, let's put together a few more cemeteries and we'll move the bodies. During the Civil War, Camp Douglas was up in the Chicago area, and about 3,000. Sorry about that.
That's all right, because Guardian's back there raising
I know who it is, and I'm not going to answer it. They put together Rose Hill Cemetery and Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, kind of further inland, and started moving bodies. And during the Civil War, there were about 3,000 Confederate prisoners of war at Camp Douglas that passed away and were buried in City Cemetery. So they started moving bodies right before the Civil War, and the war kind of put a damper on those plans. But after the war, they continued moving bodies, and they had gotten the project rolling. But then October 8th, 1871 happened, the Chicago fire. People tried to get refuge from the flames in the city cemetery. They thought, well, there aren't any buildings there. I mean, we'll be perfectly safe from the flames as long as we can make it to the cemetery. But what they didn't count on was the fact that the flames were so intense that the conflagration followed people into the cemetery.
Getting a little bit of glitching going on here.
Obliterated all those wooden markers of the poor folks. They the moisture in the granite and marble headstones boiled because of the flames.
Oh, wow.
So all these beautiful rich people monuments exploded from the pressure. So there were shards of granite and marble littering the ground. So people waded into the waters of Lake Michigan to finally get relief from the flames. And then the flames died down, and the city fathers looked around at the wreckage of City Cemetery, and they're like, we have no idea who's left underground. It's estimated there are about 20,000 people still there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they turned it into Lincoln Park, a very Tony area of town.
Hey, Tim Bills.
Yeah. Hey, Tim. So, yeah, they built Lincoln Park over it, a very rich, very nice area of town. But when they were digging the cellars for these mansions, there are people high up in Chicago society that wrote in their memoirs, I'm like, yeah, when I was a little girl, they were building our house and they're digging the cellar and they kept digging up bodies. And it was frankly quite horrifying. And the servants wouldn't stay because the servants figured the house is automatically haunted. And then after a while, they put Lincoln Park Zoo there. There's also the fact that, all right, this is an adult show. I feel okay talking about this. One of the high points, one of the landmarks in Lincoln Park was a place. I don't remember the original name of it, but it was a bridge, very, very beautiful, tall bridge, and you could stand there and look to the south, and you could see Jackson Park. You could see, and this is in the 18.
Yeah, we got computer gremlins a little bit glitching here a little bit.
Tourists to come to the World's Fair, you could see that. You could see Jackson Park from Lincoln Park. But the thing about this bridge was it very quickly got the nickname Suicide Bridge because there were plenty of people that walked to the top of the bridge and then took the quick way down.
Oh, wow.
And this being the Victorian era, where they had a much easier relationship with death than we do today, people would bring picnic lunches out and just wait for somebody to take a swan dive off the top of the bridge. And yeah, it was just all on a Sunday afternoon. So yeah, that's also contributes to Lincoln Park being extremely haunted. So yeah, if you go to the zoo, you are very likely to get photobombed by apparitions of people in Victorian dress.
Oh, now I'm gonna have to go down to the zoo. Last time I was down there at the Chicago Zoo is when my kids were probably 10 and 7.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm definitely gonna have to go check that out.
Yeah.
I mean, has the zoo ever had any claims of apparitions tormenting the animals or causing problems with the animals there?
Not as such, but I talked to a fellow that shared a very, very strange story with me. He lives up in the he lives up in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he is a paranormal enthusiast, an investigator, and he brought his daughter down for a birthday celebration. They went to Chicago. And they're like, hey, Lincoln Park Zoo, it's free to get in. This is great. And they had a cabbie who was driving them around. And he's like, your dog. And he says that he and his daughter walked up to the elephant cage, or the elephant enclosure, rather. And there was a cow elephant that was very, very interested in his daughter. Jerry Ayers was this guy's name. I don't remember his daughter's name offhand, but this elephant cow was very interested in Jerry's daughter, and she leaned up against the fence of the enclosure and was like pushing on it, and the metal of this fence was starting to strain. So Jerry's like, let's go look at some different animals. And they went to the gorilla enclosure, and there was a male gorilla that came right up to the fence, and he's looking at Jerry's daughter, and he's just looking at her, and just really, really interested. And they're like, okay, this is just starting to get weird. And they walked past the elephant enclosure again on their way out of the zoo. And this cow came back up to the fence and was like leaning her chest against the fence, almost trying to get at